We're back for another episode of Book of Experts TV, and today we're talking CRMs and sales automation. That's right. You don't want, when you work so hard in your sales and marketing, the last thing you want is for some of those great prospects to slip through the cracks. That's what we're going to be tackling with our guest in just a moment.
Time for Book of Experts TV.
Topics you love.
Experts you trust.
Friction-free referrals.
Tried,
tested,
Trusted.
This is Book of Experts, brought to you by salesman.me.
So welcome to Book of Experts TV, Stephen Logreira. So the interesting thing here, we're talking across the continent. You're out in BC, but I'm actually in Miami, in your old backyard down here in Aventura, Florida. So kind of fun connection that way.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, I've we moved around
from
quite
the
a bit.
past.
A blast from the past, yeah.
So Stephen, today I want to talk about the CRMs. This is, you untangle the web, the knots and systems in a way that a lot of people get so frustrated with. But you look at sales systems and specifically help them build the tech so that the automation will pick up the pieces. And I think that is the key point that we want to dig into. I've got a bunch of questions because I know this keeps coming up from folks. They're trying to figure out how do they solve this problem. Before we go there, though, I'd love to hear your background. How did you get into this work? Because I know you've got a pretty interesting story.
Yeah, I was actually in real estate prior to moving to Vancouver. I used to live, so I went from Miami to Minnesota, now to Vancouver, BC. And when I moved to Canada, I figured out that I had to work online. There was no way for me to work here or get any type of work, and getting into real estate was very challenging because you can't find any properties here for under $1 million. So it's a very different game when you're buying at houses at 150 to 200. All of a sudden you pop up to $1 million, finding funding, all kinds of challenges. So I had to reinvent myself when I moved here. So I have a background in engineering, and I've always been a very technical person. And even in my real estate business, that's where I got introduced to the world of CRMs. And because of the CRM and some technology that was available back then, I was able to scale my real estate business. So I've always incorporated technology and systems into pretty much every business I've ever had. So when I moved here, I had to quickly figure out something to do because I did manual labor, I did all kinds of stuff. And it's interesting because you hear immigrant stories and you think immigrating from the US into Canada is easy. It turns out it's not, right? I didn't have a work permit. I couldn't get a job. It was complicated. So back then there was a website called Elance, which a friend of mine introduced me to. And I started looking through there and everything was WordPress. And I was like, okay, so I had a WordPress website that somebody did for me when I had my real estate business. And I was like, well, it can't be that complicated. So I just kind of put my head down, started, learning how to use WordPress. Bid on a job. It was for a membership site. I got the job and I just figured out as I went along. So I started building, so I was like, okay, I understand how to build membership sites. I built quite a few membership sites through Elance. Then Elance changed things. They got bought out by Upwork. And then all of a sudden the payments, the pay structure, or the paychecks all of a sudden started going down because Upwork is, people are expecting people to build them a website for $100. And if you're in India or the Philippines, that works great for you. But living in Canada, $100 is just not enough to make a living on.
Right. You're not going to live on that.
Yeah. So I had to quickly reinvent myself, and then I got into building marketing funnels and things like that. And for about 3 or 4 years ago, I just so happened it was one of those things: right place, right time. I started working with somebody that teaches how to do high ticket sales. I built their funnel. And of course, as part of everything, I got introduced to the world of high ticket sales, and also part of the funnel, I also built them a back-end CRM system to manage the leads and all that kind of stuff. So as you know, applied knowledge is power, not just knowledge. I actually got a couple of gigs doing high ticket sales for a coach. Problem was their marketing was working really, really, really well. We were getting 20 to 30 leads a week, and we were using a spreadsheet to manage all of that. And it just became an administrative nightmare to manage all those leads and keep up with the leads. You know, the one call close is great, but there's this huge push in the industry that you got to do a one call close. You got to do a one call close. You know, guys, the real money's in the follow-up. All right. How many touches, following up with a person, you know, they got to make decisions. Maybe they got to talk to their partner, their business partner, life partner. Some people need to pray about it. You know, sometimes it might take 2 or 3 calls, especially when you're selling, you know, $2,500 to $25,000 programs, right? Most people are not going to make a decision on the first call. So I put together a system similar to what I had done for the person that was teaching the high ticket closing. And man, my admin time went from 30 minutes per lead. Imagine 20 leads, 30 minutes per lead of admin work, to about 5 minutes. And also my sales tripled because I can actually take notes and follow up and know exactly where each one of those people that said maybe, because you know you got 3 outcomes about a sales conversation: yes, no, maybe, right? Yes, great, one call close. But then you got the onboarding on top of that, right? Like what needs to happen. So there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen in order for a sale to actually go through, and most of all for the customer to be happy with your services, and of course for you to be happy with the customer, because also you gotta bring people in that you wanna work with as well. Sort of a, you know, it's a two-way street, right?
Totally, yeah.
So I was doing the sales for these coaches, and then quickly realized, man, the system is really awesome. So I decided to stop doing the sales for the coaches for various reasons. And I'm like, man, you know, so what am I going to do next, right? I call it, what am I going to do when I grow up? Right. So what's next? So I was like, you know, this CRM system is really cool, because it's not just a CRM. It's a bunch of applications that get integrated to it. Right.
Right.
So again, it's what I call a tech stack. It's different applications working together to make a bigger system. Right. Because a lot of the times all these all-in-one platforms tend to fall short in certain areas, but you can always make add-ons and put other technologies integrated into that to make it into a better system. So I started, you know, I talked to a couple of people, started working really big on my JV and my referral sources. And then all of a sudden, you know, this business took off. I've been doing it for the last 3 years. I still occasionally do some sales, and of course, my system comes in with me, right? So if somebody asks me to do some sales for them, part of it is, okay, yes, but we're bringing my system in because I know it works, I know how to use it, and if at some point I'm not involved in this anymore, you can literally pluck me out, and you pluck someone else right back in.
That's a really compelling package. Not only be able to bring the talent, but bring the system along with it. Before we get into the specifics of the tools, I want to give a shout out. So Alexander Patton Gage said, great, he's enjoying this conversation. Want to make sure we give a shout out to some of the folks that are catching us live, or if you catch us on the replay, you can also find us on social media, jump into the comments, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you. Ask the questions, whether it's again, live, or if we're following up afterwards, we're going to get those questions answered. Let's talk for a second, Steve, about, you know, I think this is such a big question that comes from folks. They're confused by the tools. There's so many CRMs out there. And then you're talking about actually taking the CRM as the foundational piece and also integrating other tools with it. How do you swim in this world of technology? I know that's part of what you're bringing as the value to folks, but what should people be thinking about when it just feels overwhelming with so many options?
Yeah, and this is where most people actually make a mistake, is they try to find the technology first, but without actually knowing exactly what they want to use it for. Okay, I like to give in the analogy of building a house, right? So this is my dream house. This is my dream backyard, right? So let's say, for example, that I found this really great plot of land that has this background. right? This is my dream. This is where I'm going to build my dream home. So I buy the plot of land and I call my contractor and say, Mr. Contractor, can you build me a house? He says, absolutely. What's the first question out of his mouth?
I think, what kind of house do you want?
Do you have a blueprint?
Yeah.
Right? Have you actually thought about what you want the house to look like? How many bedrooms? How many baths? Square footage? Do you want one story, 2 story? Do you want basement? How do you want it? Right? And here's the thing: if I haven't thought of that prior to working with my contractor, he could probably build me a house, but he's not going to build me what I want. He's not going to build me my dream house. He's going to build me what he thinks I want, and that, of course, doesn't work. Right.
So step number one is actually planning out the process and not letting the tool guide or enforce its process on you.
Yep. And I know, Tobin, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I know you struggled with this, right? And
we've tested a bunch of tools that were making us felt like it was jumping through hoops to make the tool work.
Yeah. And here's the thing: if you know what your process looks like, if you have that actually mapped out, and you know the things that you need. So, for example, do you need forms? Do you need a scheduler? Do you need follow-up? What type? I mean, there's like a million questions you need to ask yourself before you invest any money into a system. So many people go to an event and there's this really great speaker selling this amazing tool that can be very confusing. I'm throwing some hints there, but I'm not naming anything, right? And then people buy and they spend $2,000, $3,000, $5,000 on this great tool that's going to change their life, their business. And then they get home, they log in once, and then all of a sudden it becomes this big paperweight because you're not doing anything with it, right? The reason that happens is people buy an emotion. They think this thing's going to change their business when they're not really clear on what their business looks like. What are the processes? What are the steps that need to happen, right? If you look at companies, the reason companies grow is because of they have what's called SOPs, standard operating procedures. They have operations manuals. They have, in other words, for this task that you're doing, these are the steps, right? And then you have a hierarchy, you have managers, you have workers, so there's a structure that gets built. Once you understand the structure, once you understand the process, what step one, lead comes in, what happens next? What happens next? What happens next? What happens next? All the way through, customer says yes, right? Then the next thing is, how do you onboard the customer? Do you need to give them access to your membership site? Do you need to give them, send them contracts? Do you need to have questionnaires? What needs to happen in order for you guys to start working together?
So one of the things that I love about you, Steve, is you actually will sit down with someone and have a pre-planning call, like before they've even become clients with you, but you'll actually walk them through some of these questions to figure out what is the process, what's going to be the right tool. Talk a little bit, though. You do work with, you have certain tools that you favor or have worked around. Can you talk a little bit about the stack?
Yeah, I mean, again, I can throw out platforms and things like that, and I hesitate to do that just because I want to know what your process is first, so then we can figure out what CRM, what different tech stack we're going to be using, right? So on the CRM side, I like to use Pipedrive. I also like to use Zoho, and again, it really depends on what the customer wants, because Zoho tends to be a little bit more complicated. It's more expensive. Pipedrive is if you just have a small sales team and your process is simple. But again, it's hard to say which is going to be the best for you until we know exactly what your process is.
Can we talk for a second, just because I think some people are going to hear this and they're going to say, well, this is kind of interesting. I know I'm dropping the ball in some places, and it may be worth having this conversation. Who are the right people for the work that you do? How will they know and recognize themselves before they reach out and say, Steve, let's have a conversation?
That's a great question, because most people, especially in the coaching and consulting industry, the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out your lead generation, right? How do you generate leads? And if you're only getting a couple of leads a week, a few leads a month, and you're using a spreadsheet, that's fine to get started with. I always tell people, don't start investing in technology unless you know you need it, right? But when it gets to the point where a spreadsheet or maybe notebooks or just post-it notes, some people like to have post-it notes everywhere. When that gets to the point where it's unmanageable, that's the time that you really need to start looking into a system. And it has to be where you start beginning to feel the pain, because if you already have the pain, then it's a lot more painful to get started. And chances are, again, most people will have already started looking for the technology without really understanding their process. So the time to start working with someone like me is once you're getting to a point where you may be getting 10 leads a month and you're dropping the ball because the person, the prospect says, hey, can you follow up with me in a week? Hey, I need to talk to my husband or my wife or my business partner, or some people just really need to think about it, and I need to think about it, give me a week, right? So there's steps that, especially in the follow-up, there's steps that I also teach my clients. These are the things that you must do. So for example, if someone says maybe, right, says, Tobin, hey, you ready to go? And you say maybe. I say, great, Tobin, how about we talk in a week? And I actually open my calendar and I book the next call with you. Sometimes people just leave it open. Oh, okay, great, I'll send you a link. No, you book the call right there and then, right? So it's part of the process, right? Contact, lead comes in, you do the first contact. Is there a pre-qualification process that you go through? Is there a form or maybe a 15-minute questionnaire before you book the full sales call, right? And all these things that you need to think about before you actually implement the tech stack.
So if you're out there and you've got leads, at least 10 or more that are coming in on a weekly basis, and you know that you're dropping the ball, you've got to bring that to the table. What Steve's going to bring to the table is this diagnostic session where you can actually sit down and figure out what you should be focusing on, and not only the tech and the tools that could be the right fit, but also some of the strategies that would help you improve your process. As we start to wrap up here, Steve, any last thoughts that people out there should be thinking about as they're sort of, because I see this a lot of times, it's like people sort of hover in this space and they're not quite sure how to move forward. So I think giving them some guidance of how to navigate these waters and obviously connect with you would be one of the things that we'd recommend.
Yeah, I always say just sit down and look at what your sales process is. So think of it as stages, right? So stage one is lead comes in, great. So what happens? What are the first couple of steps that need to happen when that lead comes in? Who's responsible for that step, for that stage, right? And then you got to have a goal before you move them to the next stage. So for example, lead comes in from your funnel, right? And it goes into your CRM. And then the next thing is to maybe send them an email or send them a text or maybe book an appointment, right? And then who does that? Do you have your assistant or is it yourself that does that initial contact? Then the next step would be pre-qualifying. Do you set up a 15-minute conversation? Do you maybe just send them an application or a form, or is that part of the first step, right? So those are all things that you need to think about as you're going through your process. Stage one, there's certain steps in there. Who does it? What's the goal? Stage two, again, steps, who does it? What's the goal? And the thing that happens when people actually go through this process, and I won't work with you unless you and I go through this process together, because then it makes it hard for me to build your tech stack.
Right. If you don't have the information that you need to recognize what the process is and how you're going to rebuild it.
And not only that, when the customer does this, they find all the holes that need to be filled in that they didn't even realize there was. So it's like, oh, I didn't realize that, you don't know what you don't know, but then you're wondering why you're missing leads, why customers are unhappy, why you're not getting the information that you need, or they get the information that they need. It's because you probably haven't defined it to that level. And yes, it is a pain in the butt. And yes, it's not, it's a simple process, but people want to kind of go 100 miles an hour. It's like, no, 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 slow down. Let's go through this. Because then when I build you the tech, I know exactly what you need, where the pain points are, and how to fix it. Otherwise, I'm just building you something, and you end up not using it. Is what ends up happening.
Right. And no one needs that. No one needs more stuff that they've spent time, money, and resources on to build and not use. So I'd invite our audience out there. Make sure you check out Steve. You can find him on Book of Experts, or you can visit automatemysalesprocess.com. That's a way. And I'd encourage you to have that first conversation. If you are in this place where you've got the leads coming in and some of them are closing, that's great. But if you know that some are slipping through the cracks and not getting the follow-up, that's the next conversation that you can have. Steve, I appreciate you taking the time to join us on Book of Experts TV today.
Thank you for having me.